Okay, we are recording. Callie, how are you today?
I'm all right, thank you. I don't know if we're supposed to say when we're recording, but it's Valentine's Day,
It is.
and it's lovely to be spending it with a happily married and doing a podcast. So great, couldn't be better. Over here in single life.
How is it being single on Valentine's Day? How do you find that? Do
I
you
quite
give a
like
shit?
it. I quite like it this year. It's varied. I'm not a massive believer in it anyway,
Yeah.
and I think it depends, doesn't it? I feel quite happily single at the moment. So, and I've got loads of flowers, 2 bunches because I bought them for myself. So there's a place around the corner that sells off flowers at the end of the day for like 50p a bunch.
Yeah.
So I'm always walking past it. I happen to have picked up a couple of good bunches from them this week. And then I got sent some by someone I'd done a job for as well. So I've got 3 beautiful bunches of flowers, none of
Wonderful.
them from suitors, but the downstairs of the house looks like I'm extremely popular and loved.
Wonderful. Wonderful. I'm going to ask you to start your playlist, and I'm going to ask you, please, Callie, to tell me the song that you regard as having the greatest ever intro, please.
I don't even think it's that I regard it. It's just fact. Surely everyone says this one. It's Sweet Child of Mine, Guns N' Roses.
Why did you choose that?
Just as soon as you hear that first beat, you're like, this is what's happening. It's just what life's about, isn't it? It's got power and pelt, and pelt's a fur thing, isn't it? I love it, and I still love it. There's a really brilliant bar near me. I live in Kentish Town, and up the road at Tufnell Park there's a bar called Aces and Eights, where they have incredible music, like late at, you've probably been there, like late at night. They always have DJs, and they play, every track they play is fantastic, but there's still, everyone's up on their feet, and it's like a scene out of Thelma and Louise every time. I love it. So yeah, it's just gets you right there, and you know what's coming right after the first note, 2 notes, you know
Absolutely.
what track it is.
It's so weird you mentioned that soundtrack's your night from the DJ at Aces and Eights, right? Because the DJ at Aces and Eights is my friend Liam, and
The hot DJ at Aces and Eights.
yeah.
What, you're throwing that into the mix on Valentine's Day? Hold on, back the truck up. Here's a happy conversation.
So he's from Essex, as am I, and I gave him his DJ break. I run a nightclub in Essex called the Pink Toothbrush, and uh, Liam literally like wrote to me and said, "Can I come and DJ? I want to be a DJ." I was like, "Yeah," and he's gone on to become a really really amazing DJ, and
He's really
that's
good.
where he's at now. Just
Well,
he's
he is.
handsome boy.
Oh my God. He literally, I mean, every time I've ever been there, and I go there a lot, and he has always got at least one extremely attractive admirer trying to get into his booth. So please send him my regards as
I
a
will do
middle-aged
so.
fan
I
who he
will
will not
do
have
so.
noticed because I've not been 25 and trying to get close to him.
Callie, we're of a similar age, and tell me about the impact that Guns N' Roses had on you, because around our kind of formative years, they were probably the biggest band on the planet then.
Definitely. And as you know, I think we just worked out you're like 3-4 years younger than me, which in musical terms is similar, but enough to be a little different, isn't it?
Yeah.
But as you know, in those days, it was like, what was on the radio, or what did your mates like, or what could you afford to buy? It wasn't like, oh, I'll check things out on Spotify and art. So it was, you couldn't go many places when that song came out. You couldn't go to many bars or places without hearing it, right? It would tend
Yeah.
to come on if you were somewhere long enough, which at that age I always was there long enough. And it was just a real, it wasn't even what I was into. Like I was more kind of emo. It wasn't called emo then, obviously, but I was kind of gothy, indie, sort of, that was more my thing. I was less rock. But I feel like some of those kind of tracks, they just unite. It doesn't matter what musical tribe you're in, right? There are
Yeah.
some things we just like, that gets everyone, right? That is a floor-filling banger of a piece of music.
100%. I want to talk intros, and when I have musicians on, I talk to them about their approach to intros and how attention spans are getting shorter and thumbs are moving quicker. and there's that pressure to sort of grab people instantly with a song when you're writing it. Tell me about stand-up, and how do you approach your intro? Do you go big with the first gag, or do you kind of what's your approach to it? Because I spoke to multiple comedians on here, and they've all got very different approaches to it. And I know it's not on all shows, but on some shows you do have intro music. If so, what do you go for?
Heroes, David
Oh,
Bowie. Yeah.
oh,
Because I mean, not because I think I'm a hero.
I'm going to say you're writing a big check there, walking out to that.
Well, you are, but I just think most people. I've always loved that. I think it's just. I mean, I love Bowie full stop. I haven't picked any for this, but I do. And that to me, I think this sounds like a real humble brag, which I guess it is now I think about it. But I ran the London Marathon 10 years ago for the first time. When I just split up with somebody with the love of my life, and I'd had 6 months of sort of heartbreak and training for a marathon, and my kids were whatever they were, sort of early teens at the time. And they put together a playlist for me. I don't normally run to music, but they put together a playlist for me in case I needed something to get me around the last few miles. And I did fine until about mile 20. And then I put on their playlist as I was running through the tunnel by embankment. So you can't hear the crowds, you just hear the thumping of the feet on the road.
Yeah.
And the first song that came on was Heroes. And I cried. I was running, crying. I'm nearly crying saying it. And it's always meant a lot to me, that song. But for me, knowing my kids had put that on as the first thing I would hear on their marathon playlist. So for me, it's less, I'm a hero, aren't you lucky to be seeing me? It's more, this is a massive shot in the arm for me. And hopefully, I think most people feel the same when they hear it, right? It just gets everyone's adrenaline going.
Yeah, it's perfect. It's as close to perfect as a record can get. So tell me about your approach to that intro, the minute you grab the mic.
Well, mine has changed, and I think this happens for a lot of people, is that we get a bit less crowd pleasy as we go on, which sounds weird because it is obviously on the job description, you are meant to quite please the crowd or you've not done very well. But I just mean like less desperate to get a laugh quickly and more confident that I'll get them on side. So one of the things that is really important, thinking about beats in stand-up and beats in music, is the first thing I do now when I get onto the stage is nothing. So I get up, take the mic out of the stand, have a look at everyone and let them have a look at me. And I'll hold that for 2 or 3 seconds before I say a word. And that alone makes the most enormous difference, because you don't seem desperate to be liked. You've occupied the space and you've given them a chance to get a look at you, because otherwise, whatever you say first, they're like, oh, wait a minute, who are you? What? Huh? I wasn't expecting you. So it just gives people to just a chance to absorb those first impressions a bit. But yes, I'm still not courageous enough, and I so admire people who are, to do a bit of a longer build or come on in a way that's a bit more dislike. You know, Finn Taylor's probably the most classic example of someone who really goes out there like me, hate me, I'll do what I want, thanks. And he's brilliant. And they almost always, he kills every time I've seen him ever do anything. He's incredibly talented. But I'm the opposite of Finn Taylor in that regard. I still do want to be liked. So I will have a banker gag. Definitely within the first 30 seconds, I'll have tried to get a massive laugh. Someone said to me that as a female comedian, you not only need to get a laugh within the first 30 seconds, you need to be liked. Whereas male comedians, that person was saying, don't need to worry about being liked, just getting the laughs. I don't know if it's as gendered as that. But so I take a beat and then try and put out a sort of banger fairly quickly.
I like what you said there about, over time, you're less desperate to get that laugh straight away, and like you're kind of, do your thing until, the time comes to sort of. And I guess that's very similar to bring that back to music is, if you listen to like the first Arctic Monkeys record, it's like, listen to us, and it's like hooks, 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 bangers, 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 and then you get that experience and maturity, and then it's like, right, well, now we can do what we want to do, and we can take our time, and we can experiment more. So I do think there's sort of massive parallels there.
I love it that I've got anything that would even remotely be parallel to the Arctic Monkeys. So I'm going to take that. I'm going to take that, bottle it, keep it forever.
All right. Well, I'm going to take it back, Callie, for track 2. Can you tell me, please, the first song you remember hearing that had an emotional impact on you, please?
not only can I remember it, I could still sing the whole thing to you, word for word, beat for beat. So it's Romeo and Juliet, Dire Straits.
Tell me about your memories attached to that.
Well, it was all my first love. It was Nick Young was my first love. He's not called Nick Young anymore, so I can say his name. And I was with him from when I was 14 to when I was 16. And we were massively, massively in love. And I remember when I broke up with him, my mum saying to me, she said, this feels like the end of the world now, but you're going to look back on this when you're older and just realize it was just kind of puppy love and you're okay. And I still look back on it and think that was one of the loves of my life, that lovely 2-year relationship when we were both at school. And it wasn't innocent, as relationships from 14 to 16 are and aren't. So it was charted me sort of becoming an adult, I guess. And I'm not a Dire Straits fan. I've never been particularly a Dire Straits fan, but that particular song, I remember him. I still think it's a really, I still love it, and it still makes me emotional. And he also, we met in our English class. We both in English O level as then was, and I remember he bought me a Rolling Stones album, and he'd quoted a Shakespeare sonnet. He'd written it around the edge of the album, the cover, the sleeve, not the cover, the sleeve inside. And then, so I guess it was the fact that he wooed me with a Shakespeare sonnet, which I now look back, I'm like, he didn't even fully get the right bits of the sonnet. So it was definitely a bit pretentious. And he hadn't
You're
quite
pretty smooth for 14.
Smooth. He was 15, actually. He was a year older than me, and still is a year older than me, I dare say. But so he did that. So I think it was a combination of being wooed with a Shakespearean sonnet, meeting in English, a song called Romeo and Juliet, and then just the lyrics. And I just remember sitting with him in his bedroom at his mum's house, because we obviously still both lived with our parents, and and just loving listening to it. And he was a kind of like he was in a very kind of hippie home. His single mum, we smoked weed, she didn't give a shit. I was the child of 2 school teachers, had a much more buttoned up upbringing. So it was kind of like hearing that music, hanging out with this guy, smoking a little spliff and thinking life's good. So, and I was probably about 14, 15 when I heard it.
Tell me the exact emotion that you got from that.
It's a good question. I think it was just like that feeling when you really love somebody and you feel really safe in a way that is quite hard to feel when you're dating older. I'm in 30 years later into the dating game now, and everything feels much more guarded. So I think that's complete, like home. Like this is where I belong. I'm with this guy. I'm listening to this song. Life is sweet. In a way, it's very rare you get those undiluted moments. And I don't think it was all to do with being stoned. I think the emotions ran pure.
Yeah, it's a beautiful record. And
I
think most people, certainly like that I know, will say, "Yeah, I'm not really into Dire Straits, but I love Romeo and Juliet."
Yeah, some people hate it though. It's a bit marmitey. I've told a couple of people. I always think you date a bit via playlists and music, right? Or I do anyway. So you start to get a sense of a person, and music plays quite an important part in my early days of relationships or early weeks. And anyone who really hates that song, I do find it a little bit hard to get over. It's just like someone who hates dogs. I'm like, nah. Someone who hates that song, I'm like, nah, there's something missing. I don't know if I can date you.
I mean, I know exactly what you're saying. It's so true, isn't it? And then, it's pure high fidelity stuff, isn't it? It's purely like exactly what I'd expect from Nick Hornby, but it does matter. And I think you can't, because I don't know if it's like, if you find that, but if I ask a song that I absolutely love, and it's on, and somebody that that I like, that my friends or my family just go, "Oh, she's awful," it upsets me a little bit. And
It's a big problem, isn't it?
Yeah. It really is though.
It is. Yeah.
And it's exactly the same as what you said there. It's like someone that don't like dogs. It's like, ain't gonna work.
Something's missing. It's also a real lesson to all of us. Like, I'm sure you're not like this because you're immersed in music for a living. But people who write off the next generation of music, like, oh, it's not like it used to be. It's like, well, listen to it, get to know it. And part of the reason we think music that comes through isn't as good as it used to be is because we're not at an age where we are completely consumed with music around the clock. So I know through my kids, you know, just being open to the music they like has been really important to me, even if I might think on the first listen, oh, I don't know what the hell that's about. You know, that's how I discovered that Avicii did so many great things. My son was massively into EDM for a while, so I would get to know all of those kind of stuff I probably wouldn't have particularly been seeking out. And yeah, I wouldn't put Avicii on wall to wall, but there's some amazing stuff, and a lot of it reminds me of my son. And I think it's having your eyes open, isn't it, to things that aren't what you might instinctively like.
Yeah,
and
massively.
Seeing what's out there that's because it is, the world makes the music makes the world bigger and more interesting, doesn't it?
Couldn't agree more. I couldn't agree more. And it's weird, like, I don't know if have you ever tried to sort of thrust bands and stuff like that upon your kids? Because I've tried to not do that. I want them to kind of find their thing, and if I don't like it, then I guess that's kind of good, because I'm sure there's going to be records that we talk about today that I was probably totally in love with. My parents would have just been like, "What is this shit?" And it's
Definitely.
like, but that's what you want. You don't want your parents. I mean, you know, that's why I guess, you know, not that I'm got anything against them, but your Ed Sheerans and that, they're great at what they do, but your parents are never going to go, turn that shit off.
Exactly. You're not going to. Yeah. I do remember. I didn't try and influence my kids into me. I mean, I did definitely try and play a range of music. I'm a classical pianist. Well, I barely play now, but I was a classical pianist. So I did try to play classical music sometimes, just so they'd get a sort of ear for it, kind of accessible classical music, and a range of stuff. But I do remember when Black Eyed Peas, when they were chart topping with "Where Is the Love" for however many weeks that was, and we used to watch Top of the Pops back then still together as a family, and we got the album on CD, and we went on a road trip that summer somewhere, and the kids were like, I don't know, 3 and 6 or something. And we listened to Elephant the whole summer. And then I remember realizing when "Where Is the Love" came on, I was like, oh, there's stuff in here. And there's definitely stuff on the album that is not entirely suitable for 3 and 6, but actually they still there. And so one thing my kids still both love is the Black Eyed Peas from that summer with a CD player and not much other option.
Love it. I also love the fact that some songs are just exist in a different place. And let me sort of explain what I mean by that. And it's like, I was driving my kids in the car, and it's generally, I love how many people reference kind of important songs in their life, and it's generally in road trips. It's in the car. But I was just driving along, and I'm not gonna try and be too cool. I'm quite happy to sling on a bit of Smooth or Magic if the mood suits me. And Somewhere in My Heart come on by Aztec Camera, right? Which I think is one of the greatest pop records ever made.
For sure.
That's an intro.
That's true. Yeah.
And literally, my kids were quite young at the time. I just clocked in the wind mirror. Both of them were like "Summer in the City" and the Airy. I was like, how do they know the words to this? And I was like, how do you know this song? And they were like, I don't know, we just know it. And I just think there's certain songs that are just ingrained in the fabric of life that are so good and so memorable. You can hear them once and they're there. Might sound like completely bonkers, Callie, but
doesn't sound it at all.
But I just couldn't understand how they knew this song. Now, if they sing something like my youngest come down in a Smiths t-shirt, which I literally burst into tears. I was like, I finally succeeded.
Yeah,
I've got her on board. And but now, anytime that I play something from my generation or generations before, and they're singing along, I know now it's just through TikTok. They're like, oh no, this is huge on TikTok. And I'm like, is it? But yeah, I love that. And I might be way off, but just how some songs just exist and people know them, and I don't know how they know them. They're just that good and that infectious and hook-ridden and brilliant.
And it's like they're in the sand of us as humans. The sand sort of settles, and there are some songs that are just in the sand.
Totally.
And they're just there, and you don't know where they came from, but and you don't realize you know the words, and and then you're like, yeah. Those songs that are like "Coming Home," I've come home, that song's on, everything's okay.
Callie, thanks for making me not look totally mad. Cheers,
Yeah,
mate.
exactly. I mean, inside I'm like, what? But I'll go with it.
Cheers. You mentioned that your parents were teachers and you was you could play classical piano.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm presuming home was quite musical growing up.
Was and still is. So yeah, my mum sang and my dad sang and played timpani, which he still does. So my dad sort of pivoted in his career in his 40s from being a deputy head teacher to being a classical musician. So he'd always played, but he's self-taught drummer and did a bit of kit drum and then got into timpani. And you get very booked if you play timpani because there aren't many timpanists.
Yeah.
And not that he's not good, but it's fairly rare sort of they're fairly rare breed. So yeah, so he's so surrounded by music, classical music, or no pop music. My parents are not into pop music. Furthest they'd go away from classical would be towards jazz, which, as we know, is nowhere near pop. But yes, definitely surrounded by music. And we always had a piano. Both my parents, my mum was a pretty good pianist. So I just kind of from when I could stand up and reach the piano keys, I sort of was trying to play the piano. And then I learned to read music the same time I learned to read words. So I spent, I don't know how many hours of my childhood playing the piano. I was a very unconfident, bullied child, and it was a safe space for me. So I was definitely an outlier, and the piano was a very safe place to be.
Do you not play anymore?
I don't really play enough, actually. It's funny you say that. Every time I have a conversation about it, I've got a beautiful piano downstairs and I've got a note on my phone that I've had for about 6 months trying to get the piano tuned. I mean, it's perfectly playable, but it is out of tune. I don't really play very much. My daughter, I played enough to get my kids into it. My daughter's a really good classical pianist, but again, she's now left home, doesn't play much. So yeah, family tradition of squandering things we can do well. But yeah, it's time, isn't it? I'm always so busy. And as a comedian, there's always something to do. You're always writing, putting out clips, doing the next thing. And I do lots of other things besides. So it's just finding that time. Equally, I could easily get lost down a rabbit hole on TikTok for half an hour. So obviously there is the time and I need to stop bullshitting myself.
Where was growing up?
It was, well, I always think of it as Dorset. I was actually born in Buckinghamshire, but we lived in Dorset from when I was 7. So I always sort of think of myself as more Dorset than anything else.
You got fond memories of living there?
Mixed memories. I mean, as you may or may not know, I've talked about it a fair bit. I was my parents worked at a boys' boarding school, and so I was a girl at a boys' boarding school, and I was fat, ginger, bespectacled. Was not a recipe for an idyllic childhood, I would say, but there were aspects of it that were idyllic. Where we lived, albeit we were in a teacher's house, we had no money, but we did live in somewhere that was 150 acres of rolling beautiful grounds that belonged to the school. So it was a kind of privileged place to feel like an outsider.
That's quite a statement, isn't it? A privileged place to feel like an outsider.
That just describes comedy, to be honest.
Well, look, let's talk school. And for track 3, Kate, I'm going to ask you to tell me the song that reminds you of your time at school, please.
Well, I've gone a bit later than that point when I was an unhappy little girl in a boys' school into when I finally got into the local state school. So I was dying. I used to read Jackie magazine and stuff, and all I wanted was to be a normal person at a normal school.
Did you not feel normal then?
Not in a private school you don't anywhere, I don't think. And in a private school with no money. So everyone else in the school was rich. That's why they were at the school. We had no money. So I was a teacher's kid. That's why I was there. I was not the same gender as everyone else. And probably the way I kind of looked as a kid, I wasn't going to have an easy ride of it anywhere, really. So definitely it wasn't completely unhappy, but it wasn't particularly the easiest start. But then I had 2 years at my local state secondary, which was sort of merged from loads of schools across the kind of Dorset area. So it was quite a big school for a country school, like a couple of hundred in each year. So decent sized secondary school. And I just loved it. And Only You, Yazoo is the song I've picked, which is much more kind of school disco than it is little childhood.
I heard that on the radio yesterday. And it was one of the ones, I still get joy it's completely different if you hear a song on the radio than if you hear it on Spotify.
Oh yeah, of course it is. Yeah, yeah. Serendipity.
And I only caught the second half of it. It's so beautiful, isn't it?
It's perfect. It's a perfect. Don't you think a perfect song, a masterclass?
Yeah.
And so kind of understated. And it was so, if you think about it, I mean, even now, there'd been nothing like that. Even Alison Moyet's voice.
Yeah.
We don't take it for granted now. I still hear her. I think, it just blows my socks off. But at the time, it was just revolutionary, wasn't it, to hear a woman singing like that?
Yeah, hugely. And we're fiercely proud, us Essex people, because that's where Moyet and that's where Vince Clarke are from.
You should be fiercely proud of those
we
two.
We are. And I mean, for me, I don't know if it's the same for you, but it's impossible to hear that now and not have that Tim and Dawn Office moment. It's
definitely.
used so well there.
Yeah.
And you could easily have just gone for a Snow Patrol song and just got the tears rolling straight away, but he chose that and it was even more powerful. It was
I'm getting
so
goosebumps,
lovely.
you see, even thinking about it. Yeah, I know. No, it's absolutely perfect. And talking of what kids like, my daughter is big into 80s and 90s music. And when we do road trips in the car, I always let my kids be the kind of DJ, to mixed effect sometimes, but she and I have very similar musical tastes. But she, of course, thinks it's from like the dark ages, but she loves it as well. So it very frequently will come on when we're driving together. And yeah, if I was going to have a playlist at my funeral, I'd like to think that one might be on it.
How do you want that to go? Do you want like, you're not going to go for like Reach for the Stars by S Club 7 and try and everyone, you don't want everyone just going, oh, Kelly was such a laugh. Let's just remember and be really, you want Tears, everybody in like black vows.
I think everyone could just do whatever they bloody want. I've got a thing. Because I've done so many. I've lost a lot of people in my life, and I've arranged a lot of funerals. And there was one year about 3 years ago when I, in the first 3 months of the year, I had arranged 7 funerals, to the point that, just a lot of loss. And what I do know is arranging the admin of someone dying is immense. So what I have done is I have made sure there is an admin-free way to handle my death. So my kids and a couple of my close friends know there's a file on my computer, and I've got a hard copy of it locked in the filing cabinet. That's got everything from my will to here's one sheet with everyone you need to contact to cancel everything. Here's how, if you just want a kit form funeral where you don't have to worry about anything, you can do it with this. But if you want to completely rip that up and do whatever you want, that's absolutely fine. So I've given them a sort of, one that if they don't want to have to think about it, they can just use it. But I don't care, whatever they want to do.
So are you comfortable with the idea of death then?
Not mass. I mean, I've definitely got, I think my kids are half Dutch, and we've lost a few Dutch people over the years. And in Holland, a bit like in Ireland, it's open coffin. You spend time with the body. And it's a brilliant way to sort of normalize death. So I think I feel a bit less phased by it than people from cultures where it's like, shut the lid, act like it is not a part of things. So I do feel like it's part of things. But no, I mean, who's comfortable with the idea of death? I'm quite preoccupied with, it sounds an awful thing to say if he's listening or if they're listening, but my parents, my dad's about to be 80, my mum's 3 years older than him. And I'm really close to them. And I just think I was with them on Sunday, and I just thought, I don't know how long they'll be here for. And you just want to cherish you don't know when it'll be the last Sunday lunch you've had with your mum or your dad, do you? So I'm quite preoccupied with death, in terms of realizing that generation haven't got potentially that long to go. But yeah, I'm not, so I think, I think funerals are the people left behind, aren't they? So whatever anyone who gives a shit who's left behind wants to do, good luck to them. Yeah,
absolutely. So tell me about school, and let's focus more on when you went to a state school. Like, how was that? Because the idea for me of changing schools will be terrifying. But I guess if you was at a school where you felt like an outsider, it must have been a relief, I presume, to have gone to a state school.
Yeah, because they went from that boys' school that my parents taught at. They wanted to send me to another private school that obviously they didn't teach at, and the only way we could get me in there was if I got a scholarship. because we couldn't afford the fees. And I got a music scholarship into that school. So my fees were paid for because I was a musician. And so I sang in the choir and I played, you know, a couple of instruments, and I hated it so much. It was like probably the most unhappy year of my entire life. In fact, definitely the most unhappy year of my entire life to date. And so I finally convinced my parents to let me get out of that school. And I'm from a family of private school teachers. So that's just the world we'd been in. And no one really realized there were other options, I don't think. And I really did kind of make myself heard. And I ended up being allowed to go to the local state school. And I was just so relieved that it was the thing, like I keep going on about kind of girls' magazines, but the stuff I was reading about in magazines, you know, Jackie and then Just 17 and all of those, I felt like I was in that world then. And it felt like what I was reading about and what I was hearing about and what was going on in pop videos and Grange Hill, and it just felt like the things I was seeing around me, and I was just so pleased to be there. So it was a big turning point for me, just going to my local school at that key time. I went there when I was 13, 14. Yeah.
Did you know what you wanted to be when you was at school?
No, I still don't know what I want to be. That's why I've moved around a bit. So no, I thought I wanted to be an actor and presenter. That's what I thought I wanted to do. Yeah, that's what I thought.
And did you not?
I did I did drama at Goldsmiths. So I left home to do that, but I just didn't have the confidence to do it. So I was, yeah, very unconfident as a person. I'm still quite unconfident, but in those days I was very much didn't believe in myself enough to take the knockbacks of acting or presenting. And I didn't look traditionally the way you would need to. I wasn't a traditionally sort of attractive, thin person, which I think you still need to be a bit, but you certainly did need to be in the late 80s, early 90s. I just wasn't confident or cool enough, I don't think, and possibly not talented enough. So there was that small fly in the ointment as well.
Because confidence is a strange thing for an outsider looking at what you do, to walk on stage and try and make people laugh. That's the most terrifying thing that I imagine a big part of the population would think I could never do that. So where does the confidence come from for that? Because it's not like you're in a band. It's not like you're out there with a group. It's just you, and they're staring at you, and you take that 3 seconds, you know, to find the beat. And at that point, what's going through your head? Like, because for anybody that isn't confident, fucking hell, surely comedy's got to be the last place you'd want it to go, right?
It's kind of the opposite, and you probably speak to lots of comedians. It takes a lot of effort to make anything look effortless, and I think it's really good for people to know that, because we watch the person doing the thing that they can do, but they didn't just fall out of bed being able to do that.
Yeah.
And it can take months to get one gag to really, really work as in a bulletproof way in a club.
Yeah.
So but it's meant to look like you're just chatting, and people are meant to feel like you're their kind of mates. So I think I find lots of comedians will say this, and I'm sure lots of musicians and other performers feel the same. If life's tough, which it often is for lots of us for lots of reasons, the easiest bit of my day when things aren't going very well in my life will be the 20 minutes on stage.
Really?
And it's the other 23 hours, 40 minutes that are difficult. So, and what you get to, and I think this is a very common thing in sports and music and comedy and lots of different aspects of life, when you get to a certain point with comedy where you've got your chops and you've got enough material to know you've got stuff in the bag, you know, we're always working on new material, but we've got stuff to draw on now. What makes or breaks a gig is whether you actually turn up and are present and in the gig. And by that, you're thinking more about how am I going to be in this room than what am I going to say, which sounds really pretentious. I mean, it's not like an art form, it's not complicated, but the thing that audiences absolutely love is you being present and working with what's really going on in a way that seems authentic, because it is authentic. So you're in a sort of, you're so in the moment of what you're doing. If you are thinking, oh, what's it like being on stage? And am I nervous? And you wouldn't be able to do it. So if there's one thing I say to myself before I go on stage, it's to get out of my head, not worry about what I'm going to say at all, and just get into my body, literally just like, okay, just feel it. I guess it's a bit of a sort of hippie mindful thing, but just notice your body, go on there and just physically stand up and occupy your space and see what happens. So it's but it's for me much I come across when I MC, which I do a lot, I come across as very confident, I can hold the room, I can lark about. If I was out with you and your mates tonight, I wouldn't be a shrinking violet, but I wouldn't necessarily be the big voice. I'm, you know, I could be funny maybe some other time, but I wouldn't be the big confident voice in the room.
Do you find those, when you said like that 20 minutes on stage is far easier than that, you know, the rest of the day? Is that because for that 20 minutes that you're on stage, it's a complete, like, I guess you sort of touched upon it being in the moment, like, but is it just it's a distraction? Like, you're not thinking about anything else other than that?
You literally can't think about anything else. So if something terrible's happened, you know, I've been on stage after breakups, after hearing people have died, after rows, after difficult calls with my kids, and you cannot do what you're doing on stage and be thinking about that other thing. It's not possible to do it well. So it's a holiday from yourself.
Yeah.
You're just doing one thing. And when do we in life ever get to just do one thing? That's all you're doing. Yeah. And if it's working, you're getting the enormous high of laughs and you're completely present in the moment. And that's why it's so addictive. You know, that's as pure a hit as, you know, heroin. It's an amazing hit.
Okay. Track 4. Tell me the first song you remember buying from a record shop, please.
I was kind of tempted to lie about this and be cooler, but then I was like, no, let's do this properly.
You can't be cool, because this is the one where I want absolute honesty, because everybody's been shockingly honest with these, and there's been some howlers.
Have there? So mine's probably not the biggest howler you've had by some margin then, if you've had real howlers. Yeah. So mine is It Ain't What You Do, It's the Way That You Do It, Fatboy Slim and Bananarama.
It's a great record.
It is a great record, but I feel like it was so mainstream at the time that I bought it. That's why I bought it.
Yeah.
And I feel like I either was, or I'd like to think I was a bit cooler than that. Yeah. You know, I was listening to like the Strawbs and Ivor Cutler and stuff with Nick Young, and sort of weirder kind of stuff, and also stuff from the kind of 60s, and we were doing all that, and Steve Harley and Cockney Rebel and stuff. So it's kind of like wasn't completely typical of the stuff I liked, but obviously I liked it enough I went and bought it. So yeah, and I mean, it is a great track, isn't it? It is a great track.
Yeah, and it's quite unusual, because I think that was that their second song together. They'd done Really Saying Something first.
I think it is. Well, it's certainly the second one that I was aware of.
Yeah, and obviously that is kind of quite sort of tribal sounding, and it, as was a lot of Funboy Free stuff. And I remember, maybe it is those couple of years, but obviously I was absolutely in love with all three of Bananas.
Like, well, everybody was.
Like, mainly Siobhan. Like, and then it was like, and it's Terry Hall from the Specials.
I know.
And like, it was like, what could you want? Yeah, absolutely.
I dated a music journalist I dated him in my 30s, but he was 10 years older than me, and he'd been a music journalist in the 80s. So when I was a teenager, he was in his 20s. So he had all these really cool stories about the bands that I was a teenager listening to, and it sort of seemed enormously cool that somebody I was sleeping with had done all these things. Anyway, he had slept with Siobhan from Bananarama and from Sade, and with Sade. And I remember thinking the most attractive thing about him was that he had slept with those two people. I was like, I feel like now I've probably slightly slept with them, haven't I?
Yeah, I mean, you could probably sling it on your CV,
couldn't you?
Yeah,
one removed sex with 80s pop stars. So in fact, that could be a book, couldn't it? But yeah, so I found that very exciting that had happened with him and them. So that was my link in later life to Bananarama, but it wasn't the one I knew I was going to have when I innocently bought that record.
Absolutely. Tell me about the record shop and growing up. Was it a place that, you know, you'd sort of go, and would you regularly buy sort of records and stuff?
Well, this was the thing about living in, so I lived in rural Dorset, like really rural Dorset. We didn't even live near a town, and our nearest town was tiny. And the town that was nearest to where I grew up was a really small place called Shaftesbury in Dorset, which is where the the Hovis advert, you know, the famous Hovis advert of the guy going up the hill. That's actually on Gold Hill in Shaftesbury. It's not in Yorkshire or wherever it's meant to be. So so it's very picturesque, but not a lot of a music scene. And at the time, there wasn't even like a WH Smith. There was a kind of local, it was called Harding's. It was the local kind of WH Smith style store. Yeah. And they had a tiny little record bit at the back upstairs. So you were down to whatever they had in, which probably also explains why anything I would have bought there would have been mainstream. Like there was no way I could have got something that was a bit more. But then in sixth form, I left home and I moved to Salisbury in Wiltshire to do my A-levels at a college there. And suddenly there were a couple of record shops, a couple of cool ones, and an hour price. And suddenly I could actually go and discover music through leafing through vinyl, because they were music shops that had things I hadn't heard of. And I also worked at the Salisbury Arts Centre to pay my way through college, and we had amazing bands. I saw amazing people there, very, very wide range of types of music. So for
who'd you see? Throw some out there. Who'd you see?
Well, one thing I do remember, and I know he's a bit of an arsehole. I don't believe I'm compromising anything by saying that, but Van Morrison.
I knew he was going to say Van Morrison just on that statement.
Yeah, you didn't. Yeah, exactly. Not Salisbury Arts Centre so much as Wanker. But I remember seeing him. It was my first weekend working at the Arts Centre, and I was like tootling around getting things ready at reception. And he went into the room, and all the instruments were out ready for them to do their. And he just walked around the stage, and there were like 7 or 8 different instruments there, and he just played each one of them. Not showing off. He didn't know I was particularly listening. He just played each one at a sort of prodigally talented level. And I do remember just standing at the back thinking, I've just seen Van Morrison walk around the stage playing all these different instruments. So it was a combination of that, and then things like Blue Oyster Cult and those kind of, like, I was into like those kind of, that was more my scene of the sort of bands I was going to for choice. But I did like Van Morrison. So that my sixth form years were all about discovering record shops, vinyl, massively eclectic taste in music. I've still got eclectic taste, and I always did, and being a full-on goth, but loving loads of other, you know, like I loved Squeeze. I went to see them loads. They played at the Arts Centre. So yeah, a confused teenager musically and in other ways.
I saw Squeeze last year.
I still love Squeeze.
Whenever I think about if I ever answered the questions to this, my favourite ever intro is Up the Junction. I just think it's just.
Why didn't I think instant. Of that? Yes.
What, the greatest pop song that hasn't got a chorus?
Yes.
So good. So good.
So I've seen Squeeze probably more than any other band. Yeah.
Yeah.
I first saw them up in Poole when I was 15, something like that, 14. And I've seen them regularly ever since. I saw them at the Royal Albert Hall. When was that? 4 years ago. Yeah. So yeah, love them.
Wonderful. Let's go clubbing. Track 5, the song that soundtracked your years in Clubland, please.
It was hard to pick one because I gave a good account of myself on that scene, drink and drugs wise, but so some of it's a bit of a blur, but it has to be Back to Life, Soul to Soul, because I went to Goldsmiths, which is in New Cross, and at the time their arts college bit was in Camberwell, and I lived in various bits of South London in that kind of area, that line from Lewisham right the way across New Cross and through to Peckham and then Camberwell. But I settled, as much as I settled in those years, in a little basement flat just off Cold Harbour Lane in Brixton, which was obviously near the Fridge in Brixton. So that was my go-to club. And it was also at the start of E, or MDMA as it now is. Yeah. So it was the start of that all kind of becoming a thing, an accessible thing. And I had very early exposure to ecstasy through a job I was doing, and a guy that was basically running all those kind of raves, motorway raves, and he paid me in cash in ecstasy. And I didn't know what ecstasy was. It wasn't a thing. So the first time I did ecstasy was before it was very kind of known, and did it with 3 mates because we'd been given enough for 4 of us. So yeah, those years, or that particular time, I think Soul to Soul, the Fridge in Brixton, and doing loads of drugs, really.
I mean, it's, you mentioned the sort of, the M25 raves and stuff, and that was very much in and around where I'm from. And we used to occasionally sort of venture up to the fridge. That was a big night out if we went to the fridge.
Even if you lived by the fridge, it was a big night out.
But it's hard to explain to people of different different generations just how you could not get away from that Soul to Soul beat for about a year.
Yeah.
When like Keep On Moving dropped and then Back to Life, that beat was coming out of every XR3i in Essex, 100%. You could not, every shop was playing it, every club was playing it, every pub was playing it. It was and it was so British sounding as well. It's like, considering like, I guess when you're making sort of soul music and R&B music, like people generally look across the pond to America for that fix. And I think for a good couple of years, Jazzy B and that, they snatched that back and they owned it. And Back to Life, to this day, Karen Wheeler's vocal is just sublime.
Totally. And it's definitely the sort of thing that even now, if there's certain sort of tracks I'll put on, if I'm having a bit of a blue wake up and I'm just like, I can't quite get my shit together and things aren't falling into place, there's a couple of things you'll just bang on and listen to and you're like, yeah, that's okay, that's got me right where I need to be. So yeah, really. And just the freedom of it, because I ended up working for MTV when I was young, when I was in my early 20s, and having the sort of dream job, but I also had my kids very young. So that pure unadulterated freedom, single, living in Brixton, my daughter's kind of living a bit of that life over in Madrid at the moment. And I just think, I mean, obviously I worry a bit about if she's doing a bit too much of those things, but I think, bloody enjoy it, because you're going to have a lifetime of not being able to really do this stuff to the level you want to do it. And as long as you're safe and you've got some kind of balance and you're not making really bad decisions for yourself, then just a bit of undiluted hedonism with an amazing soundtrack.
Absolutely.
Enjoy it. Yeah.
Absolutely. So tell me a little bit about, I want to touch on something. You said that, Soul to Soul is the sort of thing that you'll lean on if you wake up and you're feeling a little blue. Is that your go-to, that you will go for something to kind of shake you out of it, rather than, for me, I'll go and grab some Nick Drake and I'm just going to go and laze for like an hour and just embrace that misery for a bit, and then I'll crack on. But like,
I can't bear the misery. No, I do the opposite.
You'd never soundtrack it.
I do, but I have to be when I'm at a slightly safer space. So when I say safer, if I'm at the real depths of this is hard, and I've talked a bit about, suffering from, like lots of people, depression and anxiety sometimes. So my low moods are very low. And if I'm at a very low mood, I need to get out of that very low mood. And then I might get to the point, when I say safe, where it would be emotionally safe to wallow a bit more. But yeah, there are days when I couldn't quite bear to sit with those harder things. So then I'll go for, Come Up and See Me, Make Me Smile. That's yours. I was in a band that did, it was a covers band, and that was one of my favorites that we used to do. So yeah, it makes me happy for lots of reasons. So I tend to try and lift myself up and out rather than going deep. But so Nick Drake, I mean, good. There's that you've got. Come on, what a good way to spend an hour on a sofa, no question.
That's all right.
Yeah.
Tell me a little bit about working at MTV.
Well, I mean, it was literally the dream job. I got the job in 1995, so I was 25, 26.
So you literally at MTV when Britpop drops?
Yes, I was at the Unplugged, the famous Oasis Unplugged, where Liam didn't rock up. Well, he did rock up, but not on stage. Yeah, I was there. I was at the George Michael Unplugged. Lots of the Unplugged at that point. So yes, that's where I worked. But I also unexpectedly got pregnant. So I had this weird time in my life when I was partly out there in that scene, but partly looking after a tiny baby. But yes, I went to all the kind of MTV awards over here and across the pond. It completely transformed my life. I'd never barely been on a plane until then, and suddenly I was jet setting around, and it was an amazing. And I used to work I was in the offices on Hawley Crescent in Camden. I still live near there, actually. That's why I live near there, because I spent so many years working for MTV on and off. And at the time, they used to do a lot of the live stuff and the recording in the studios in Camden. And my office at one point was, I had a kind of glass fronted office, and it was next to the boys' dressing room. So where the male artists would come out to walk to the studio, they'd all come past my office. So that was, yeah, it was kind of an amazing time, really. And yeah, just sort of, you do things in your life where you look back on them and go, that was amazing. Why didn't I enjoy it more? I bloody loved it. Like every day I loved it.
Yeah.
And I knew I was lucky. I totally knew I was lucky. And then it did change. It got bought. It got bought by Viacom. It became corporate. But in the 90s, I left at the end of in 2000 and then came back on and off after that, because it changed so much and it became so corporate. But it was quite fresh and new and small. And MTV, it's hard to say to somebody now what the brand meant then, but it was an epic kind of thing, wasn't it, on the level of huge, like people knowing Coca-Cola, and it was when you couldn't get music videos anywhere else unless there happened to be a show like Top of the Pops. So that was the music video jukebox, and it's hard to imagine that now. So those were amazing years, and what a job and what a time of life to have it.
So you toy with the idea of acting. You then get the job that everybody wants. Everybody wanted to work at MTV. And you get that and you excel within that. And then you then choose to do another equally competitive and difficult industry in stand-up. We spoke about confidence. Tell me about your relationship with drive.
Well, I think you can sum up drive by saying it's the classic sort of therapy question, isn't it? What are you driving out? So if you're very driven, there's something going on. And it's not entirely a positive, healthy thing. So it's about I've always been the kind of uncool person in a cool life, if that makes sense. So like the places I've been have been cool. And compared to being, I don't want to say any profession because it sounds like I'm writing people off, but compared to lots of things, it sounds glamorous and cool. But I've always felt like the least cool person in the cool places, the least cool of the cool kids. So I think it's, I don't really know what it is. I know now what it is. The reason I do what I do now is definitely not for fame. I would very much not like to be recognized everywhere. But it's for relevance. I think that's why music matters so much. It's that we all want to be able to say something and do something that feels relevant. And we don't want to feel like we've just been put back on the reserve bench or that we're unheard and unseen. So for me, the link now is not about getting out there with confidence in terms of what I exude, but maybe daring to say what I want to say. All my TikToks, I've only just got on TikTok recently and I've got a kind of decent following building up. And it's completely authentic what I'm doing on there. It's just me. It's not wrapped up. It's not orchestrated. It's not thought about. And that's, I think people like that, don't they? It's quite vulnerable and flawed. And that's how I feel. So maybe I'm getting more confident. Now I'm pretending to be less confident.
You find that sort of validates that desire to be relevant and heard?
TikTok and stuff.
Yeah, and comedy.
I think it, well, you literally do have a voice and you are heard. People might hate it, but there's no question. If anyone's hearing it, commenting on it, liking it, hating it, they've heard it. So, and you work out your voice by saying things. You know, when I try things out comedically, I'll have a sort of premise and I'll think, well, I know what I think and I know why I think that's funny. And then you work it through with audiences and you try stuff out and you muck about with it. And then you're like, that's the thing I think. And that's the thing people can relate to. So so I think I used to think everything had to be sort of glossy and perfect and I had to pretend that I fitted in and everything was great. And now I'm like, no, I relish the mess, of it all, and that's what I'm immersed in. And I think it feels less fake, and perhaps I'm feeling a bit more confident now. I'm pretending a bit less, if that makes sense.
Totally. I'm going to take you home. A favourite song from an artist from your home county, please.
Well, it's funny because when you said it, when you asked the questions, I was thinking, and then I was like, yeah, of course, PJ Harvey. Jesus, like, how did I not remember PJ Harvey? So yes, so PJ Harvey from Yeovil, as I'm sure you know, and always, I wouldn't say it was kind of, I should say the actual track Down by the Water, PJ Harvey. And I'm not I love Down by the Water, and I love a lot of what PJ Harvey has done, but not everything. But the reason I got even more into PJ Harvey than ever was I was dating the bassist from My Bloody Valentine for a bit, and she is mates with all that kind of world, and she's also from Yeovil. And it was when I was up in Edinburgh having a miserable time doing a show or whatever. Edinburgh's tough for comedians. It doesn't always go easily. And we just went to see PJ Harvey playing. And we knew, like, she knew everybody was there, and like the Bad Seeds were there. A lot of them were part of the show. And it was just the most magical holiday from what I was doing as a comedian. And I had this night with PJ Harvey and all those kind of people and Deb, and it was just amazing. And so if PJ Harvey didn't have a close, and I don't mean that I hung out with PJ Harvey all night, but just being there hearing the music and being there afterwards, it just all that thing about some music just bedding into you, it kind of bedded into me that night. And ever since then I've been even more of a PJ Harvey fan.
I mean, I thought you've been quite humble when you're saying that, you're always the least cool person in the room, in a cool room, in a cool job. You probably were in that instance. Like, if you're in a room with Polly Harvey and the Bad Seeds, and someone from My Bloody Valentine, I mean, that's as cool as it gets.
I was totally the least cool person in the room. Totally. That's going to be the name of my autobiography. Least cool person in the room. But at least I've been in some cool rooms, right?
Absolutely. Oh, wonderful.
I remember sitting down and her saying, and we sat down and we had these, like, wherever we were in a kind of, it was like, do you want to watch it backstage, or do you want to watch it in the main thing? And I think you do want to watch those, don't you? You want to be in the sort of in the thick of it. And I remember sitting down and saying to Deb, I was like, this guy next to me went off to get a drink, and I was like, doesn't he look like Johnny Marr? And she went, it's because it's Johnny Marr.
When I set this podcast up, right, I've said it a few times on previous episodes. I set this podcast up I was happily podcasting elsewhere, but I thought, no, I'm going to do the music podcast. And I said, all I ever want to do is I want to interview Maxine Peake and Johnny Marr. I've been lucky to speak to Maxine. I spoke to Niall Marr. I spoke to Johnny's boy. I've still not spoke to Johnny Marr. And I am obsessed with Johnny Marr. He's like my absolute hero. Tell me you spoke to him.
I did speak to him. I said, I think I've dropped my pen. Can you just see if it's under your feet?
Definitely the uncoolest person in the room, Kelly.
So there you go.
Love it. Seize the moment.
But do you know what? I have always believed, and whether it's some music or then I worked obviously in telly and been in the orbit of some massive names throughout my life, but because I'm the uncool person in the room. But if there's one thing I've learned, it's just to treat people like they're just so normal, like just don't. So I've never, ever sought out a conversation with anyone who's a big name. And if a conversation's happened, I've treated it very much like I'm chatting to, Nora 2 doors up in the street, because I just think that's what when you get that close to that world, albeit I wasn't a part of it, but I was close to it the whole time. It is amazing when you're close to people that matter to you, but equally I would never say anything that didn't feel like a kind of normal conversation. I just wouldn't. Yeah. But I think I could have probably in retrospect come up with something better than that. Yeah, that's fair.
Okay. Right, this is your last song, and so this is when you get to be a tastemaker and an influencer. Could you tell my listeners a song that you think they may not know that you would like them to hear?
I was really torn on this. Am I allowed to say the one I didn't choose just because it's a great track?
Yeah, have some honorable mentions.
Yeah, so the one I didn't choose is In These Shoes, Kirsty MacColl, which lots of your listeners will know because they're people who are musically savvy, but not everybody knows it. So if anyone doesn't know it, I think it's a phenomenal track. And yeah, like many people, found it so devastating when we lost Kirsty MacColl, and she very much is a part of everything that I've loved about music for decades. So that's an amazing track. So I was tempted to choose that, but I do think some people will know it. So this one, I think less people will know. And it's Drunken, Drunken Poet's Dream by Hayes Carll. Have you ever heard of that?
I hadn't. I've listened to it since you sent the list over. It's gorgeous. But tell me a little bit more about it and where you discovered it.
So the way I discovered it, I was dating somebody over here. This is about 10, 15 years ago, probably closer to 15 years ago. And he co-owned a bar called the Phoenix Saloon in New Braunfels, which is near Austin in Texas. And the first time I went out there with him, it was during South by Southwest, and I'd never been to Austin, and what a time to go to Austin.
Yeah, absolutely.
So we were just, surrounded by music. And have you been to South by Southwest?
No.
So when you're there, anyway, Austin's a bit like that, and Texas, the kind of cool bits of Texas are like that, but every single bit of space is used for music. So every car park, every street corner, every venue, and it's completely tribe agnostic. It doesn't matter what you look like, who you are, what age you are. You walk in to whatever type of music is going on, and you are completely unjudged and welcome, which is, by the way, why I love Aces and Eights, because it's the coolest bar in London, I reckon, but no one gives a fuck. You can go in whoever, whenever, and you're accepted. So Aces and Eights is like a mini slice of Austin, Texas, I reckon, in that regard. So it just just blew me away, the music and everything that was going on in Austin. And I was very in love. And this guy co-owned this bar. And so we would spend a few nights at the Phoenix Saloon, which I don't even know, I'm sure it probably is still going. And they used to have brilliant live music, but not massive names, certainly names that were quite big in the country scene and maybe big there, but not names we would know. And this guy, Hayes Carll, came on, who I didn't know who he was. He was quite good looking. It was a whole different face of country music. I had no idea if there's one type of music I didn't know much about. It was probably country at the time. And this guy just came on, and that was the first song he played. And I was just like, wow. It was like heart-stoppingly good. And I love it. It's another one of my absolute fave. And I wish everybody knew about Hayes Carll. Not everything he's done's been great, but he's done some amazing stuff.
We'll make it easy for people to go and listen to it. So we do a little Spotify playlist to accompany the podcast with all of the songs that we've spoken about today. We put Kirsty MacColl on there as well, of course.
Thank you.
And I guess let's talk a little bit more as we start to wrap up about you and what's going on with you. So what can people expect from Cally Beaton from the rest of this year?
Well, my big thing, like this, that's why I say, please, I love podcasts. I love your podcast, and I listen to podcasts all the time. If I'm not listening to music, I'm listening to podcasts. And my podcast is the big thing for me at the moment. I've been doing it. I'm about to do the 100th episode of it. Namaste, motherfuckers. And it's, you know what it's like with podcasts. It takes, I don't know how long it took for yours to start to get kind of really good numbers, but it takes a long time to break through. And you do these things as a passion project, and people don't realize you're probably losing money on them. Well, you are losing money on them to start with. And I've just been trying to keep the faith of my podcast because I love it, and I love the conversations I have on it, and I have incredible guests on it. And so that is my massive passion, but it's also something that professionally is starting to kind of get some momentum. So for me, it's the podcast. I'm doing quite a few bits of radio and telly. I love radio more than telly, so I hope to do more and more radio. And I've also got a book in the works, which is a bit of a spin-off from the podcast. So it's a kind of so that's going to happen by the end of this year as well. And of course, I'm gigging like a motherfucker as well still. Yeah. So still trying to get better as a comedian. So lots going on.
Wonderful. And if people want to keep up to speed with you for gig dates and news about the book and everything else, where's the best place to follow you, Cally?
So I've got a website that's usually pretty up to date, so people can see my live stuff, and it's callybeaton.com. And then I'm on every different social media, Twitch, TikTok. I'm on the whole bleeding lot. And if people just look up Cally Beaton comedian, they'll have no trouble finding me. So very Wonderful. Findable.
Well, if it's cool with you, when this goes out, we'll tag you in it, so people that aren't following you already can go and follow you.
Very cool with me. Very cool with me.
Wonderful, Kelly. I've had an absolute great time chatting to you. Thank you so much. It's been a real pleasure.
Thank you for having me. It's been amazing.
Wonderful. I'm going to press stop. Don't go anywhere.
I won't. Was that you?